A 6-inch desk grinder. This is a the $60 US model. It has a coarse wheel and a fine wheel. Has a light attachment, which makes it pretty handy. You'll also need a simple variable speed Dremel tool. A 1-speed will do, but variable speed is a little better. The only attachment you'll need is a cutoff disc, otherwise known as an emery wheel. They usually come in packs of 50, or you can, if you're lucky enough, you can buy them in packs of 5. Relatively cheap. For the cutoff discs, any attachment, probably looking at a minimum of $10. But excellent investment. They should last a good time. Always let the speed of the tool do the work. Never force your wheel or you wear it down a lot faster. And make sure whenever you do any kind of cutting, make sure you always quench your steel to keep it cool at all times as to not ruin the temper. A simple propane torch, cheap attachment, cheap propane. You'll also need a glass of water or a bowl of water for quenching or dunking your heated tools into the temper at a later point. The best material for making a pick is a simple, cheap carbon steel hacksaw blade. It's a simple fine tooth. The finer the better, because the deeper the tooth, the less material you have to work with. I picked this up at a 10-pack for roughly $4.50 American. These are very cheap to come by. The benefit of a really cheap carbon steel is that they're a little bit thinner than a really expensive, up to $8 a blade, brand name type of hacksaw blade. The benefit of this steel, it's very, very flexible. It doesn't bend. It's fantastic. It's the best material ever. You'll also hear people talk about brick strap. Brick strap is similar. It is a harder steel, but it is too thin, and it does deform a little easier. I've also heard people talk about street cleaner bristles, which are also decent, but very hard to find. But always go for hacksaw blades. You can't go wrong. I've compared this steel to other stainless steel picks from the Southern Ordnance Company, and I find this even superior to the stainless steel. This stuff is really good, dirt cheap, $50 a blade. You should be able to make 3 picks from each blade. The benefit of this steel is that it's very easy to start. So basically go for 1/3, give it a quick snap, there should be no bends, everything breaks off perfectly, break again, and you got yourself 3 pieces of metal to start with your perfect pick set. This is a custom single wheel grinder. Notice I have my light set up so I can actually see what I'm doing, and I also have my water on hand to quench my steel as it gets hot from the grinding. This particular setup is a 1/2 horsepower with a very coarse wheel. I use this to rough out my original picks before I fine-tune them. Next step would be to cut out a pick blank. A blank is a pick piece that is actually can be turned into any kind of pick, or most kinds of picks, but we'll get to that later. Before you start grinding, always wear safety glasses. Hot metal will be flying at you, and the angle you want to look at in order to cut your picks properly will require you to stare almost directly in the line of sparks. Always wear safety glasses, regardless. So now we're prepared to make a pick blank. Using the piece of cracked off hacksaw blade that we started with earlier in our materials, we're going to start the grinder and make our blank. So we'll get this baby wound up. And away we go. Always remember to quench in water after every few seconds of grinding. Be very careful for flyback. You don't want this wheel to grab the pick and throw the pick or your piece of metal that you're grinding. So always grab hold really tight and always grind away from you. Don't let sparks fly into your face. What I will be doing is starting grinding on the side of the blade that has the teeth. I will start probably halfway through and I'll be making a little arc. The broad end will be our handle and the middle will be our shaft, and we'll leave some space here to work with for our pick end later on. We always want the shaft to be about 1/8 of a thickness, 1/8 of an inch thick. That's probably the minimum. You can go a little larger, a little smaller, depending on the particular locks that you're interested in. By using your fingers, you can tell if the metal is getting too hot. As soon as you feel some warmth, make sure you dunk it. Now it's up to you if you'd like to taper or keep it straight. It's personal preference. But basically this is what I would call a pick blank. We have our handle, which I have purposely left a little bit of hacksaw blade on. I find this useful for whatever purpose. You never know when you need a hacksaw. But you know, you may want to be aesthetic and round off the edges. Or if it's your preference, you can grind off the blade. It really makes no difference. But it also makes a little bit of grip too, depending on how the teeth are on the blade. So then we have our finished blank. A blank basically can be made in almost any pick, as I said before. If you would like to make a snake rake, I would recommend actually grinding from both sides and having your shaft come out of the middle of the metal rather than just one edge or the other. The benefit of grinding the blade part or the sawtooth part is that you have a nice flat back. That's a good standard to know what you're doing. Starting with a basic blank similar to the one we just made, we're going to start with a basic hook pick. So basically, to make a hook, you don't need anything fine like a Dremel tool. Most picks can be made on a simple grinder, but it may be your preference to use a Dremel tool to get more fine detail. But to make a simple hook, we can keep it all in the grinder. You may want to experiment with different bends and different lengths of bends when making a hook pick. Pay particular attention to your tip. Some people prefer 3 different types of tips. You can have a flat tip, like so. A flat tip allows people to feel pins a little better. Some people prefer a rounded tip. A rounded tip is good for gliding off pins a little easier. Some people prefer a diamond tip, which is basically the same as a flat tip except it's pointed on the end, so grind as you choose to have your pick shape. I prefer round tips. They seem to glide a little easier. But basically what we have here is a basic pick. It's a little long, but this can be finished afterwards. And ideally you have your little hacksaw hole blade, which acts like a keychain if you choose to put them on a ring set or whatnot. But this is your basic pick. It's very flexible, extremely strong, stronger than stainless steel picks, and highly recommended. An alternate method to producing blanks is to use a grinding wheel on a Dremel tool. This method is a little slower, and you'll find that you will wear down wheels at a fairly fast rate, and it will be fairly expensive. So I'd recommend grinders to start your blanks, and either use the grinder to finish your tip, or use the Dremel tool with a cutoff wheel to finish your blank. Right now we're going to make a rake using the Dremel tool cutoff wheel. And remember, always remember, I've been to the hospital enough getting shit picked out of my eye. Always wear your goggles. So now we have our water for quenching and our blank. Very important that you always keep a firm grip on the blank, and when you're doing a Dremel, you always want to make the wheel crawl into what you're working on, not fight against. If you fight against, it will bite, and you'll either you'll break your disc, or you'll throw this, potentially cutting yourself. So always be careful. Notice how I cut small chunks rather than letting the wheel grind everything away. What I've made is a simple but effective random rake. It could be called a double. Some people might call it a triple. Simple little snake, and that's our basic little rake, or snake rake. Always keep cool. If you get it too hot, you will ruin the temper on the carbon steel, and it will bend. Tension tools are made out of the same material. I find hacksaw blade perfect for making tension tools. I would still recommend the 1/3 strategy, although some people would like to go 1/2 and make long double-ended or whatnot. There's many different variations, but to simplify, we'll make a simple 1/3. So crack off your carbon steel blade, and away we go. Another word on blades: there are high cobalt blades. The price is many thousand times more, but I find they don't produce the same results, especially the ease of cracking. A cobalt blade will bend before it cracks, and you get a little lip on your bend, which is something else you have to work at grinding off. But starting with a simple blade, a Dremel tool is a must for this particular procedure. I've tried snips, and I've tried other methods of getting a strip of this material down to the right size, but it never particularly seems to work. So this is one method of producing the material needed for a good tension tool. Basically, before the Dremel tool starts, what I'm going to do is rip this down the center using long, slow strokes and constantly cooling until I have a 1/3 long piece of material that we'll show later how to temper into a proper tension tool. So what we have here is a little piece of metal that I've ripped off the hacksaw blade. It doesn't matter if this blade is on the cutting edge or the flat edge of the blade. It'll serve its purpose either or. But this is our basic start. An alternate method to ripping up a big hacksaw blade is to buy what's called a junior hacksaw blade. These come in 6-inch lengths, and they have little wires that latch in to make the hacksaw. These are great because you can snap off both of the little attachment ends and actually make your tension tool out of this, and not have to worry about cutting so much, because it's basically made for you. All you have to do is grind it down to the proper proportions on the ends, but we'll get to that later. Next, we're going to use a torch to heat this little band that we ripped off to make our tension tool. So we want our water to actually temper. Now what we're going to do is heat it up and bend it, always using pliers to hold, and always be careful using fire. We want to bend approximately 1/4 to maybe a little larger, maybe a little smaller, of the top over when it's red hot. When metal gets hot, like carbon steel, what happens is the crystalline structure inside changes, and you will actually make it very soft. So by making it extremely hot and then dunking it, you keep that crystalline structure, or change it to your favor to make it more rigid. It's called tempering. So what we're going to do is start our blowtorch, and this is a cheapy little blowtorch. And always make sure that the part of the flame, that the cone of the middle of the flame, that's the hottest part. This part is cooler than the actual part that's originally combusting. Right in the middle at this cone is where you want to hold your metal to be heated. So let's start. You want to make it as hot as possible in as small an area as possible. So now we have a heated blade. We slowly bend it. So we have a 90-degree angle. Once this is as hot as we can make it, we dunk it really, really fast. That will make the carbon steel very rigid and perfect for our purposes. The options here are to do the opposite on the other side, have a double-ended wrench, or what we're going to do now is make a twist flex wrench, which is a 90-degree turn, which gives you a flat spot. Rather than putting it in the lock and having to go on this narrow spot, by twisting it, we'll have a nice comfortable flat spot to push on. Do this as close to the head as you can. Always wait for it to be red hot before you turn. So now we do our 90-degree. And dunk. Now we have a perfect 90-degree twist flex wrench. All that needs is to be finished up now. So you can do it on a grinder or use the Dremel. Grind the head to your particular length and width, and finish the end, round it off so it doesn't hurt your fingers, and you've got a perfect twist flex wrench. And that's it for wrenches. That's all I would recommend. If you do this heating and cooling more than once, what happens is that the carbon steel will get very, very brittle and will snap. So be careful only to heat and cool once. Using this 6-inch junior hacksaw blade, it's still very easy to make a suitable tension wrench. But first we've got to get rid of the little ends. It's pretty simple. Snip them off with a wire snip. And this process is very similar to what we just did. We want to heat the blade up and create our 90-degree bend. With these longer ones, I like to make a double wrench. The longer shaft gives you a good flex, whereas the part that's fire hardened has very little flex and is very rigid. Now I have a double-ended tension wrench. One thing I do like to do with double-ended like this is to make a double-ended twist flex, which doesn't fit in any particular case very well, but it's a wonderful tool if you don't mind bulk. So we simply heat the middle. And 90 degrees. And dunk. Now the only thing remaining to do with this blade is to grind down the tips to make them narrow enough that it gives us enough working space for our picks. But this is a great little wrench. It'll serve you well. Notice that it has the option to give you a long, flexible wrench if you need, or if you need a firmer wrench, you can move in above the flex and get a very firm wrench. So here's our basic set that we've created. A tension wrench, which I've grinded or filed down to the proper size that I require. If you find that your metal is too brittle after you've tempered it, you may want to let it cool just from oranged, just to below orange, almost non-glowing before you cool it. But some experimentation on your particular carbon metal will give you better results. But I've basically filed it down to the proper size I wanted, and the same with these. I've fine-tuned with a file. The last step that's very important to making a good functional pick set is to sand them down. Simply get some emery paper. You might want to start with a coarse grit and then work down a little finer, but you want to get the paint. That paint should be taken off to give you nice smooth steel underneath your picks. So this is the part where you deburr, take off all the little edges and burrs and stuff, and you'll have a nice smooth well-functioning pick. A little round file is helpful in some of these rakes when you want to get the inside out. Another little word on rakes is that when you make your spacing, you don't want to make your spacing smaller than any one pin can fit into. There is a sensible spacing, and using this blade as scale, it's fairly reasonable to figure out what scale I'm talking about. You may want to variate your rakes sometimes. You might want to make random variations or stick with a known one that you found off the web, but make a few. It doesn't hurt to make a bunch of different variations that you can try. And that's about it. Once you've done all this, you should have yourself a beautiful little pick set. It should give you years and years of pleasure. And if you do find you're breaking them, you're probably using them too hard. One more word: do not temper your actual picks. Do never ever heat these up. The metal is fine the way it is. If you heat these up, they'll become too brittle, and you'll crack your picks off in the lock. So keep them cool at all times when you're manufacturing them, and there'll be no need to purchase picks. All in all, you should be able to make a set like this in maybe 15 minutes if you get all the materials there. You should be able to make your basic pick set in no time at all. As for pick design, these are what you would call a sawtooth rake. These are very random and kind of work on different types of locks. Notice how I bump on the beginning, bump on the end, and a rough bump in the middle. Should take on in for all variations. Here we have a bunch of different rakes. These are generally random and in different sizes. They work on different locks, but it's up to you to create your own designs. Down here I have the various hooks. We have a deep hook and some lesser hooks, and then we get into some deep curve hooks. All these work great with hacksaw blades, and highly recommend those over others, since hook picks can basically take the place of most rakes. When used as a rake, they kind of act as a single rake rather than a multiple rake. At the very end we have a double ball, for lack of a better word, great for some wafer locks and some double-sided locks. Any variation of these should provide a great pick set. In combination with a few tension wrenches, there should be never ever a need to purchase your own from another manufacturer.